Hi there and welcome to the second video in this Euro 2021 analysis series. In this video we're going to have a look at using the skills we learned in the previous video, the BeautifulSoup introduction, to actually scrape the result data from the European Championships to our Python application. So this tutorial is going to demonstrate how to scrape those results using Python. We're going to use three libraries in particular. The requests library, which will send HTTP web requests to the BBC, and that's to retrieve HTML data for each result. We're going to use BeautifulSoup to parse the HTML from the response and extract the data that we're interested in, notably the team names and the results, the scores, the amount of goals that the teams have scored. And we're going to use pandas for a few helpful date related utilities. We'll use pandas more for the analysis stuff later on after we have collected the data with BeautifulSoup. So objectives, we want to understand how to use BeautifulSoup to parse raw HTML and extract the data that you're interested in. We want to understand how to use the requests library to send simple HTTP GET requests to a particular website. And we also want to understand how to construct code that will fetch and extract data across multiple pages that we're interested in. So let's get started with that here. I've got the imports and we're going to take a look at the BBC pages for the Euros. This is the website we're going to actually extract the data from, is the BBC, and these are the URLs. Now let's go to one of those URLs. This is the first game of the championships. Basically, on the pages that we're looking at, we have a result. Or we have multiple results on a day where more than one game was played. So what we can do is we can look at the URLs to see on a given date there's going to be a particular set of games played, and then there'll be another URL for the next date, and so on up until the end of the competition. So I'm going to paste some code below, and that will set up this structure here. We've got a base URL, and that's the first part of the URL, and it doesn't include the date. And then we've got a start and an end date, and I'm going to use pandas to generate a range of dates between the start and the end date, inclusive of both. So I'm going to call that tournament dates, and we'll say pandas.dateRange, and we'll have a date range from the start date to the end date. Date range is a very handy pandas function for generating dates over a range. And if we look at the output of that, we'll see that we actually get a date time index. This is a pandas data structure that has every day between the start date, the 11th, you can see the 12th, 13th, 14th, etc., right up until the final day of the competition, the day of the final, which was the 11th of July. So we've got all the dates, and now what we want to do is we want to make requests to this URL and get the data using BeautifulSoup. Let's firstly see how we add the date to the end of the URL. So in a code block, I'm going to iterate over the dates for DT in tournament dates. And let's slice that and just take the first 5 tournament dates. So that will give us, I think, these 5 dates. So what we want to do is print, in this case we're just testing, so we're going to print an F string where we look at the base URL and we append a slash to that, and we will then append the date. And let's see what that gives us. Now it gives us the original base URL with the dates, but you can see that it's actually a date time object because it's got the hours and the minutes and the seconds component. So we need to strip that off, and we can do that by calling .date, and then that will give us the URLs that we need. So if we open these in a new tab, we see that we actually get the page we want. So that's the sort of structure we're going to use. We're going to iterate over all of the dates, and we're going to construct the URL from that. But instead of printing it out, what we're going to now do is we're going to look at sending an HTTP request to that URL. Once we get the data back, we can look at how to extract the particular information we want from that data, from that web page. So that's the next step in this video. So now that we have the expression we need here, let's construct all the URLs we need from that. So we'll do a list comprehension, and we'll copy that expression in there, and for each date in the tournament dates we will create that URL compose that URL from that. So if we look at the URLs, we'll get back all the URLs from the beginning up until the end of the tournament. So now we can use these URLs within a loop to create HTTP requests to the endpoints and then collect the data. Let's start by looking at the first URL, which represents the first date of the tournament. So we can get that with the 0 index of the URLs array that we've created up here, and we get the first day of the tournament. So what I want to do is use the requests module to send a GET request to that URL, and we'll store that in a response variable. And once I have that response, let's say we look at the text. That should send an HTTP request, and the text attribute gives us back the document's contents as text. Now that's exactly what we need to do for all of the URLs in our structure, and then we need to pass this text that we get back to the BeautifulSoup constructor, and we're going to cover that in a minute. But what I want to do first is I want to actually have a look at this URL, and we're going to look at how we find the data that we need. So in this case, in this URL, we need to get the team names, Turkey and Italy, and we also need to get the scores 0-3. So if I inspect the element using the browser's developer tools, you can see the HTML structure of the document, and you've got a span class here. Let me just put that down a bit. This is a span class that contains the team name, and it's got a particular class name associated with it that we're going to use to then grab the text within that class, which in this case is Turkey. And if we look at the actual scoreline itself, you can see there are additional fields. It's hard to see in this browser, but we're going to cover it in more detail in a minute. And what I'm going to do is there'll be extensive notes on this on the blog post and on the GitHub notebook that I'll make available in the description of this video. So do check those out, because that will make it easier to follow what's going on. I'm going to go ahead by pasting some text in that will make it clear, and then we can write the code that will do the job for us. So let's get cracking with that. So as I said before, the text that we've got back here has to be passed to the BeautifulSoup constructor. So let's do that now. I'm going to define a soup object, and that's going to be equal to BeautifulSoup, and we'll pass the response.text, and we'll define the HTML parser. So if we look at the soup, we'll get back the text representation, the stringified representation of all of the document's contents, and what we want to do is use that to be able to extract the data that we need. So I'm going to go to a new code block, and we're going to use the find all function that we learned about in the previous tutorial about BeautifulSoup. So let's grab the fixtures here, and the class that we're looking for here is called sp-c-fixture. Just write that in here. So we're going to use the soup.findAll method, and we're going to find the article, which is an HTML element, with the class. And this is the dictionary, the second parameter. Class is equal to the spc fixture, and that should give us the fixture, all the fixtures on that page. And in this case, I think only one fixture on the first day of the tournament, and that's that Turkey fixture. And that corresponds to this wrapper around the whole fixture here. So it's an article HTML element, and it wraps the, as you can see with the dynamic developer tools, wraps the fixture, and when we find that element, we can then look at the children in order to grab the data that we need. So let's look at how to go from this article parent object and get the children data that represents the team names and the result scores. So I'm going to paste in a bit of text here that will help us understand what we need to do. So for every fixture, we can extract the home and away team from the HTML document by looking at the following selectors under the article that we've grabbed up here. So for each fixture, we're going to look at these classes. To get the home team, we need to look at that class. Away team, we need to look at this class. And for the home goals, it's this class, and the away goals is that class. So we need to look at these classes in order to grab the data for each fixture. So for every page on the BBC representing a date in the tournament, we'll call soup.findAll. It will give us a list of article HTML elements with these children tags that we can target with these classes to get the data that we need. So let's do that now for one of the games. I'm going to copy this code here. Now the home team is going to be, we're going to index into the fixtures that we've got up here, get the first fixture, and we're going to select one, and we pass into the select one method this class up here that represents the home team, and then we call .text in order to take that HTML tag and just get the text within it, which in this case will be Turkey. And for the away team, which is Italy, it's the same procedure. The class has changed slightly. We've now got the fixture team -- away, but again we just call the .text to get the team name for the away team. And it's similar for the home and the away goals. We just use those classes and we get the text. So what we're now going to do is define a handy helper function called showResult. It's going to take in the home team, the number of goals the home team have scored, the away team, and the number of goals the away team have scored, and it's going to return a string representation of the result. And we're going to use an F string. We'll use the home team, the home goals, the number of goals the home team scored, and the away goals, and finally the name of the away team. So it's just an F string that will print out the data, and then we call the showResult function, and we can pass in home goals, away, and away goals, and that should print out a nice representation of the result. And this data has been grabbed dynamically from the web page, and this is a correct representation of the first result in the European Championships. It was Turkey 0, Italy, the eventual winners, 3. So that's how we've grabbed this data from a web page by using BeautifulSoup and calling the findAll function to target a particular element. And then from that element, the fixtures element, we grab the tag by indexing in, and then we use select one to look at the children of that tag, and we use class names in order to target the data we need. So that's how you do it for one fixture, but now we want to do it for all of the fixtures in the European Championships, and we're going to look at how to do that now. So what we need to do is go in a loop through every single URL, get all the fixtures, and then extract the data as we can see that we've done here. So what we need to do is send multiple requests, one for each day of the tournament. So it's best practice when you're doing web scraping not to inundate the server with requests. So what I'm going to do is import the time module, and I'll spell it right, import time, and then we can sleep in between requests so that we're not being too aggressive with our scraping. I'm going to define the results array, which we're going to use to store all of the results, and then we can define our loop for URL in URLs. So again, we need to send a HTTP GET request to the URL in order to get the HTML document. Once we've done that request, we will sleep for 1 second, and we use the time.sleep function in order to do that. Once we've slept for a second, we will pass our response.text to the BeautifulSoup constructor, and we can then extract the fixtures using the same code that we defined up slightly higher in this article. It's the soup.findAll function, and we look for the articles with the class of sp-c-fixture. So we just copy that code there. That will give us all of the fixtures for the given date in the tournament that we're on. Remember, each URL represents a date. So once we've got the fixtures, we can loop over each fixture for fixture and fixtures, and we can grab the home and the away teams and the goals that they scored. So I'm going to grab all of that right now, and we'll paste it in there. So we get the home data for that fixture, we get the away data, and the home goals and the away goals, and we're using the same classes that we defined above. That will get us the data we need from the fixture article. Finally, I want to call the function, or rather I want to append to the results array the result of calling the function that we defined up here, and that function was showResult. So I'm going to copy this code here. Well, that will return a string which we will then append to this results array. So that is sort of collecting all of our results into one results array, one results list in Python. So yeah, we'll call that there, and that should do the trick. Now this will take a while because we're doing a request for every day in the tournament, and we're also sleeping for 1 second in between every request, which will add some time to the loop as well. Now before I execute this code, I'll change response to request. That's a mistake from me. We're using the requests module and we're calling the .get function to the URL. So we'll execute that, and as I said, this will take a while, so I will resume the video when that has completed. And now that that has completed, we're going to have a look at the results that were collected in that for loop. So let's look at the results, and we should see all of the results from the European Championships, from the first game of the tournament, which was Turkey versus Italy, right through to the final, which was Italy versus England. Now that is successfully grabbed all of the results from the European Championship using only web scraping from BeautifulSoup. So now what we're going to do is go to the next stage. We have one problem with this code. There are results such as Italy, Spain, and of course the final as well, Italy, England. These games are represented here as a draw, but actually we know that these are knockout games that went to penalties, so we need to represent that in the data. So we need to extend the scraping process to check whether or not the game went to penalties, and if so, we need to collect the penalty result. So that's the next stage of the video. We're going to look at that now. And we're going to start by pasting a bit of text in to explain how we go about this process of finding the penalty winners. So the knockout rounds, they start on the 26th of July. So what we're going to do is create a knockout games start variable using pandas. And for each game, we're going to check whether it's on or if it's after this date. And if it is after this date, we're going to do a search for the penalty data within the HTML web document, and that can be found with this class here. So I'll copy that down here. So let's get started. We're going to redefine the results as an empty list, and we're going to we'll copy this variable, and we're going to do a pandas timestamp object, and it's going to have the date corresponding to the start of the knockout round, which is the 26th of June. Yep, that should be June, I believe. Just correct that. Okay, so now that we've got that, we can redefine the result function that we saw earlier. I'm just going to paste this in. It's very similar to what we had before, show result, except we have a new parameter, a keyword argument of pens. If that's true, we show penalties at the end of the game, or at the end of the string rather. Otherwise we just return as we normally did before. So that's just changing the format of the string that's returned if the match went to penalties. So now that we've got that in place, we can loop over our URLs. So for URL in URLs, and the first part of this code is actually the same as up here. So we get down to the fixtures. I'll just copy that. And okay, so we send the request to the URL, we sleep, we convert the response text to a BeautifulSoup object to allow the parsing to occur, and then we extract the fixtures with the find all function. Now once we have the fixtures, we are going to again copy the code from above for getting the data for the home and away goals and teams, and then once we've got that, we can then do our check. So we get the game date by looking at the pandas.timestamp, and we take the URL and we split the URL on the slash, and we get the last element. Now why does that work? That's worth looking at quickly. If you look at the URLs, if you were to split this URL on the slash, you would have a Python list that was composed of multiple, there would be multiple elements within that list, but the last element after splitting on the slash would be the date. So that would give us the string date, which we can then convert to a pandas timestamp. And the reason that we do this is that we can then say if the game date is greater than the knockout game start, which is the constant that we defined up here for when the knockout rounds start. If the game day is greater than or equal to that, it should be greater than or equal, then what we can do then is we can look for the penalties, and we're going to use the select one function here, and we can pass in the class that we defined up here. This is the class associated with the penalty data in the web document. So we've got that now, and we can then say if pens, if there are penalties within that HTML document, then we can append to the results, and I'm just going to paste this in here, the show result function, which we're calling, but this time we pass in the penalties argument here, the pens argument, which was defined up here. By default it's none, but in this case we have penalties. The if statement evaluates to true because the select one method must have found an element with that class, and therefore we pass the text representing the penalty result into the show result method. So that will give us the penalties, and then we can continue. If there are no penalties, or if the game day is not greater than or equal to the knockout game start, then we can just use the same call as we did before. I'm going to copy this, and we'll get rid of the penalties.text because there are no penalties, so that will evaluate to none by default, and the normal stringified function will return. So we only pass in penalties if this returns a valid BeautifulSoup tag and is not none. Otherwise we just append the result as we've seen up here. So let's execute that, and again this will take a while, so I'll resume the video when that finishes. And now that that loop has finally finished, we can take a look at the new results list, and you can see that this time we have the same output roughly as before, but whenever we have a match in the knockout stages that went to penalties, the penalty text is displayed after the result. So now we can actually see who won the knockout game on penalties. So that's a step forward for our code. We now know who won every game in the European Championships. What we now want to do is model this code using Python objects. So I'm just going to copy in some next steps. We're going to do this in the next video. So I'll copy and paste this text. So what we're going to do is model the data in a more natural manner. Rather than just having these strings, we want to have objects representing fixtures and team stats. So we'll create Python classes that model the data. In particular, we'll create a result class. Now this represents a result in the tournament with attributes for each team and the goals each team scored. And we're also going to create functions, methods within that class to determine some useful behavior based on the result. We're also going to create a team stat class, which is going to represent an individual team's overall stats in the tournament, such as how many goals did they score, how many did they concede, how many games did they win on penalties, and so on. And we're going to use Python's data classes to model that data, and we're going to annotate them with types as well. We're also going to look at dunder methods to model certain features in a Pythonic way. So that's all for this video. If you learned anything, please like and subscribe, and hopefully you'll watch the next video. This code that we have in the notebook is described in much greater detail in the blog post and on the Jupyter notebook on GitHub. So check those out if you want to know more about the HTML structure and the classes that we're using. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.